It was a late evening when I first saw her, the kind of evening where the stars are just beginning to show and the sky's still holding on to the last remnants of twilight. The highway stretched out in front of me, endless, dotted with only the occasional road sign or billboard. The hum of the truck was soothing, almost hypnotic, especially after a long day on the road. I'm a trucker, been driving for years now. You get used to the solitude, the endless miles, the dim glow of your dashboard lights, and the monotonous click-clack of your truck tires against the asphalt. My mind drifts and I think of home, the wife, and whether I'll make it there this time around before the storm hits. But tonight, things felt different. Something was in the air, something I couldn't shake off. I was heading north, a route I've driven countless times, but this time something felt off. It was that same stretch of highway, just outside of that sleepy town, the one where the trees grow tall and the road bends a bit too sharply around the cliffs. There's always something eerie about that part of the road. You can't explain it, but it's there gnawing at you. And that's when I saw her. She was standing on the shoulder, barely visible in the dim light, but enough for me to catch a glimpse of her as I cruised past. A young woman, maybe in her 20s, wearing a thin white dress, almost like something out of a dream. Her hair was dark, hanging loosely around her face, and she was looking straight at the truck, a soft, almost sad expression on her face. My foot hovered over the brake. It was the first time I'd seen someone out here, especially at this hour. I slowed down, the gravel crunching beneath my tires as I pulled to the side of the road. "Need a ride?" I called out, opening my window just a crack. The woman didn't say anything at first. She just stared at me. But then, after a moment of hesitation, she nodded. I glanced around. The highway was still empty, the only sound coming from my engine. No one else was around. I was the only one who could help her. I unlocked the door and stepped out to let her in. She climbed in without a word, sitting quietly in the passenger seat. I didn't ask any questions. She looked like she had nowhere else to go, and honestly, I didn't think too much about it. You pick up hitchhikers sometimes, well, more often than you'd think in this business. Some folks don't mind the company, even if it's just for a few miles. We drove in silence for a while. It wasn't awkward, but it wasn't comfortable either. She didn't speak, just gazed out the window at the passing road, as if lost in her own thoughts. I tried to make small talk, ask where she was headed, if she had any family nearby, but she just gave me a soft smile, her eyes distant. It was strange, but I didn't press. After a while, I could feel the tension in the air. Something wasn't right. The whole ride felt unreal. It wasn't the fog that rolled in or the heavy mist that seemed to hang low over the road. It was her. She hadn't said a word in the last half hour, not a single thing. It was like she wasn't really there, like I was just driving with an empty seat beside me. I glanced at the clock. We had been on the road for nearly an hour, and the town I was supposed to drop her off at was just around the corner. So I took the exit and pulled off the main highway, driving down the familiar winding streets toward the small town. I slowed down as I neared the drop-off point, the old gas station near the edge of town. It was closed now, just a run-down building with a flickering light hanging above the door. I looked over at the passenger seat. She was gone, just like that. Gone. I froze. I swiveled in my seat, looking around. I checked the back of the truck. Nothing. What the hell, I was sure she'd been there, right next to me. But now the seat was empty, and the only thing I could hear was the soft hum of my truck's engine. My skin prickled as I stepped out of the cab. I looked around again. Not a soul in sight. It was as if she had never been there at all. The months passed as they always do when you're on the road. The miles blur together one after another. You get so used to the rhythm of it, the lonely stretches, the long hours, the constant hum of the truck. I had forgotten about her. At least I told myself I had. After all, it had been months. It was just a weird moment. It wasn't like I hadn't seen odd things before. Drivers who seemed to disappear at rest stops, the occasional shadow in the rearview mirror that disappeared when you looked over your shoulder. It all became background noise, part of the endless road that stretched across the country. But then it happened again. I was coming up on that same stretch of highway, wide open, surrounded by the dark shadow of trees. A few miles ahead, there, was a curve in the road that always felt a little too sharp, especially when you're driving a truck. It's the kind of bend that can make you feel like you've just crossed into another world. It wasn't the kind of place you'd want to pull over and stop, even if you had to. There was always something eerie about that particular corner. I was a few hours into the night shift, and the truck was cruising steady. The fog from earlier had burned off, leaving behind that dry, cold air that only comes after a long day's heat. The moon hung high, casting long shadows over the road. The truck's headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the road and the occasional sign. And then I saw her again, just like before, standing on the shoulder, just a little too still, just a little too quiet. Her white dress seemed almost glowing in the pale moonlight. She didn't move when I drove past, but I could see her clearly. Her long dark hair blowing slightly in the breeze, her pale face barely visible under the light. She was looking right at me. I almost missed her. That's how close it was. My foot hovered over the brake for just a moment, that weird feeling gnawing at the pit of my stomach. I slowed, then kept going for another few seconds before my mind finally caught up with what I was seeing. I'm no rookie. I know when to stop, and I wasn't about to leave anyone out here, not at night, not on this road. I pulled over gravel, scraping under the truck's tires as I slowed to a stop just a few feet ahead of her. I knew the drill by now. Open the window, ask if she needed a ride, get her in, and get moving. No reason to waste time with small talk. But as I looked at her again, I noticed something different. There was a look in her eyes this time, a kind of intensity, like she had been waiting for me specifically. It was as if I was the only one who could see her, the only one she was waiting for. It didn't make sense, but that's the way it felt, like I had been chosen. I opened the passenger side door and nodded toward the seat. Need a ride? She didn't speak, but after a moment she moved slowly, her movements almost deliberate. She climbed in without a word, just like before. The air in the cab felt colder when she sat down. I couldn't explain it, but the temperature in the truck seemed to drop by a few degrees. Maybe it was just the nerves, but it felt like more than that. I didn't speak either. I didn't want to. I felt like I was losing control of the situation, and the silence between us made it even worse. I glanced over at her as we started rolling again. She was staring out the window, her profile soft and distant in the moonlight. Her dark hair hung over her shoulders, almost obscuring her face. She wasn't looking at me, but there was something almost peaceful about the way she sat there, like this was her place, like she belonged here in the cab of my truck on this desolate stretch of highway. I tried to shake off the unease. I wasn't a rookie. I'd picked up hitchhikers before, especially in the middle of nowhere. And I was getting close to that familiar exit, the one that led to the small town where I usually dropped her off. I figured it would be just like the last time, a few quiet miles, and then we'd part ways. It wasn't like she'd be a problem. It had never been a problem before. The radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. "Breaker 19, come in, anyone out there?" I reached over, absent-mindedly clicking the knob to change the channel. Nothing but static. The highway felt empty, like I was the only one awake. It wasn't exactly peaceful, though. It was more like a pressure building inside my chest, the kind of feeling you get when you're just waiting for something to happen. "Where are you headed?" I asked, breaking the silence. She didn't answer right away. "I'm headed into town," I added, hoping it might prompt her to speak. Still nothing. I could feel her eyes on me then, though I couldn't see her face. I glanced over at her. She was watching me now, her lips slightly parted, but still she didn't speak. It was like she was waiting for me to say something more. I swallowed hard. "I'm guessing you're not from around here?" She finally nodded, just slightly. It wasn't enough to give me any kind of answer, but it was a sign, I guess. Her silence was different this time. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't reassuring either. I could feel the truck's tires humming along the road, and for a second, I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but the world outside the truck seemed to blur. The shadows of the trees stretched longer than they should have, and the road signs began to seem different, almost out of place. I shook my head. Maybe I was just tired. The next thing I knew, I was pulling into the town's outskirts. But as I reached the familiar street, where I always dropped her off, I noticed something wasn't right. The gas station where I usually let her out was gone. The sign was a rusted shell, no longer lit up. The streetlights flickered, casting long, eerie shadows on the cracked pavement. I didn't recognize the place. I slowed to a stop. "Here we are," I said, looking over at her, expecting her to get out, to disappear like the last time. But she didn't move. I turned to look at her again. She was staring at me, her eyes wide, her face pale under the dim streetlights. This wasn't the same woman. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice shaky. "This is your stop." But her lips didn't move. The silence stretched between us. Something was wrong. My heart started to race. I threw the truck into gear, ready to back out and get the hell out of this place. But when I looked ahead, I froze. The town had disappeared. The streets were gone. The road was empty, just stretching forward in front of me. I turned the wheel, my tires spun out, nothing. I checked the rear view, the town was gone. The gas station was gone. All that remained was the endless stretch of dark highway ahead. And then, through the windshield, I saw her again, standing on the side of the road. This time, though, there was no dress, no soft, sad eyes, no distant look. There was only the dark figure of a woman waiting for me, and that was the moment I realized she wasn't a hitchhiker. Not anymore. She never had been. I had been driving in circles, and I'd been driving with a ghost. The truck lurched as I slammed my foot on the brake, the sound of rubber squealing against the road echoing through the empty night. My heart hammered in my chest, and my hands clenched the steering wheel so tight I thought the leather would tear beneath my grip. The woman, the ghost, was gone again, just like that. 1 minute she was standing at the side of the road, waiting patiently for me to pick her up, and the next the highway stretched ahead of me, empty and devoid of life. I couldn't breathe. Every muscle in my body locked up as I stared out through the windshield, half expecting to see her reappear at any moment. But there was nothing, just the dense, suffocating blackness of the highway stretching on forever, and the unnerving sound of the engine running beneath me. I let out a shaky breath and wiped my hands on my jeans. This wasn't happening. None of this made sense. I had to be going crazy. There had to be a logical explanation for everything: the disappearing hitchhiker, the strange town, the sense that something was terribly wrong. I reached for the radio, my hands still trembling, and flicked it on to drown out the silence. The static filled the air before a voice crackled through. "Breaker 19, anyone out there?" The voice sounded distant, fuzzy, like it was coming from far away. I let go of the knob. My throat was dry. Why now? Why was this happening? I couldn't focus on the road anymore, not with the memories of the ghost woman lingering like shadows in my mind. She'd been real. I was certain of that now. She wasn't some figment of my imagination or a weird trick of the lights. She wasn't some tired, sleep-deprived hallucination. I had picked her up before, driven her to the same place, watched her vanish time and time again. But this was different. I felt it. Something had changed. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her reflection standing there. But all I saw was my own tired face staring back at me. I felt dizzy, my mind spinning with confusion and fear. I had to know what was going on. There was a place, a small diner just outside the town. I had passed it a few times on my route, a neon sign flickering above the door that always seemed like a beacon in the dark. The kind of place where a trucker could grab a coffee and stretch his legs, where other drivers might be hanging out, swapping stories about their trips. Maybe someone there knew something. Maybe they could explain what was happening. I didn't have a plan. Hell, I wasn't even sure if I was thinking clearly. But the idea of driving aimlessly through this endless stretch of road without some kind of answers was too much. So I turned the wheel and headed toward the diner. The diner was just as I remembered it, old with that faded neon light outside, buzzing faintly. The sign read, "Open 24 hours, though I doubted anyone really ever came in here at night except for truckers and the occasional late-night wanderer. The place looked tired, worn down by years of use, but the warm yellow light spilling through the windows was oddly comforting in the way that only a diner could be at 3 in the morning. I parked the truck outside, the gravel crunching under. The tires as I pulled to a stop. The silence around me was thick, oppressive. I killed the engine, but the buzzing in my ears didn't stop. I stepped out of the cab, the cold air hitting me like a slap. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but I ignored it. I had to find answers. Inside, the diner was empty except for the waitress behind the counter. She was a thin woman with sharp features, wearing an old uniform that looked like it had seen better days. She looked up when I walked in, her tired eyes meeting mine. "You're up late," she said, her voice flat. "Yeah," I muttered, stepping inside. "Long night. Coffee?" "Yeah, please." I slid into one of the booths, the worn vinyl squeaking beneath me. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't just from fear. It was from the adrenaline, the need to make sense of what was happening to me. I stared out the window at the empty highway, the headlights from a passing truck streaking through the fog that had rolled in since I left the road. The mist seemed to swallow everything in its path, making the world outside feel smaller, more claustrophobic. The waitress brought over the coffee, black just the way I liked it, and placed it in front of me without saying a word. I wrapped my hands around the cup, trying to warm them up, trying to steady my thoughts. "Seen anyone strange around here?" I asked, unable to stop myself. The waitress didn't respond at first. She wiped down the counter with a rag, then leaned against the edge, looking at me with a strange expression on her face. "You talking about that girl?" she asked quietly, almost as if she was afraid to speak too loudly. My heart skipped a beat. "What girl?" "The one who hitchhikes along that stretch of road," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned forward. "What about her?" The waitress hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one else was listening. "You're not the first to pick her up, you know," she said, her voice growing even softer. "She's been seen around here for years, but she never stays, never goes anywhere." My blood ran cold. "She vanishes, doesn't she?" I asked, my voice cracking a little. The waitress nodded slowly, her eyes distant, as if recalling something long buried. "It's always the same. She gets in, you drive her to the edge of town, and then she's gone. Just like that, like she was never there." I sat back, the weight of her words sinking into me like a stone in a pond. "Who is she? Why is she always on that road?" The waitress didn't answer immediately. Instead, she wiped down the counter again, then picked up a rag and began to fold it, her hands moving mechanically. "I don't know," she said after a long pause, her voice barely audible. "Some folks around here say she's a ghost, that she died in a wreck years ago somewhere on that highway. They say she's been trying to find a way to get home ever since." I stared at her, trying to comprehend what she was saying. "A ghost?" I repeated incredulously. The waitress nodded slowly. "Some people say she was in a car accident on that stretch of road, but I've heard different stories over the years. No one really knows for sure. All I know is that she's been haunting that stretch of highway for as long as anyone can remember." A chill ran through me. "How long?" The waitress shrugged. Her eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't understand. "A long time. Some say 10 years, others say longer, but no one really talks about it. It's like the road is cursed. People drive out there, but they don't always come back. And the ones who do, they say they see her too. Every few months, like clockwork." I felt my stomach tighten. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept it. But deep down, I knew. It wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just some trick of the mind. The woman I had been picking up, the hitchhiker, wasn't real, not in the way I had hoped. She was part of something far darker. Before I could ask more, the waitress stood up straight, her face pale and grim. "You should leave. You don't want to be on that road after midnight. Trust me." I was about to respond when a loud crash echoed from outside, followed by the screeching sound of metal on asphalt. I jumped out of my seat, my heart racing as I rushed to the window. Through the fog, I saw headlights slicing through the mist, a truck barreling down the road, too fast, too erratic. And just behind it, I saw her, standing on the side of the highway. The same woman, the same pale face, her white dress glowing in the darkness, and as the truck sped past her, she vanished. I didn't know what was worse, seeing her again or knowing I had no way out. I stumbled back from the window, my breath shallow and rapid. The eerie sound of the truck's tires screeching on the wet asphalt echoed in my mind. I could still see the woman's figure in the fog, so hauntingly still, as if she were frozen in time. But she was gone now, vanishing with the passing truck, just like she always did. I stood there in the diner for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. The waitress was still behind the counter, her face as pale as the woman I'd just seen. She didn't say anything, just watched me with that same distant, sorrowful expression. It was as if she knew exactly what I was thinking. "You're not the first one to get caught up in her," the waitress said after a long silence, her voice low and heavy with the weight of knowledge. "People come and go, but she's always there, waiting." I didn't know what to say. I felt like I had walked into a nightmare that no one had the courage to wake me up from. I had heard stories. There were always stories about things that go bump in the night, things you don't talk about. But I didn't think this was one of those stories. This wasn't just some urban legend or twisted tale to spook the new drivers. This was real. This was happening to me. "Why?" I finally croaked, my throat dry. "Why does she keep coming back? What does she want?" The waitress shook her head, as if it pained her to even think about it. She grabbed the coffee pot and refilled my cup without asking, her hands trembling ever so slightly. "I don't know, no one knows for sure. Some say she's stuck, trapped between worlds. Others say she's trying to find peace. But the road doesn't let her." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. The road doesn't let her. I tried to swallow that down, but it wouldn't go away. I knew something was wrong. I'd felt it the moment I first picked her up. She wasn't just hitchhiking. She was lost, in a way I couldn't understand. "How do you know all this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The waitress didn't look up. She just kept her gaze fixed on the counter in front of her, as if the answers to my questions were etched in the wood grain. "I've been here a long time," she said slowly, her words heavy with history. "I've seen it all. The accidents, the disappearances. The ones who don't make it, the ones who do but never come back the same, and the others. The ones like you who stop, pick her up, and drive her out of town. They never leave the same. They always come back. Always." I felt a knot twist in my gut, a gnawing feeling that told me she was right. I had seen it before. The way the town had changed when I'd driven in. The way the road seemed endless, looping back on itself as if it had no beginning or end. I hadn't realized it at the time, but now I could see it for what it was, a trap. A place where the dead and the living collided, and once you stepped inside, there was no escaping. "How do I get out of here?" I asked, my voice desperate. The waitress gave a small, bitter laugh, the sound like something breaking. "There's no way out," she said, her voice hollow. "Not once you've driven that road. You can try all you want. Drive through the fog, turn around, stop. But it won't matter. You'll always end up back here in this town, picking up that girl. Over and over again." I stood there, the weight of her words sinking in like quicksand. I had a feeling I already knew what she meant. I had felt it, but I refused to believe it. I couldn't let it be true. I wasn't some lost soul, trapped in this never-ending nightmare. I had a life, a future, a way out. I couldn't let this be my fate. "I don't care what you say," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I'm getting out of here. I'm not going to be another one of your ghost stories." The waitress didn't try to stop me. She didn't argue. She just nodded, almost as if she were resigned to the fact that my choice had already been made. "Do what you have to do," she said softly. "But don't say I didn't warn you." I didn't know what else to say. I paid for my coffee, leaving a few extra bills on the counter. Without a word, I turned and left the diner, my mind racing, heart thumping in my chest. Outside, the fog had thickened again, creeping over the road like a living thing. It seemed to pulse and breathe, the mist curling around the edges of the truck, pulling at the headlights. I climbed into the cab and slammed the door shut, the cold air biting at my skin. The engine hummed to life beneath me, but my thoughts were far away, tangled up in confusion and fear. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing there, watching me again. I pulled out of the parking lot slowly, my fingers tight on the wheel. I could feel the weight of the road pressing in on me, every inch of it suffocating, as though the highway was alive and pushing back against me. The fog swirled around me, thickening until it felt like I was driving through a wall of white. Pushed forward, ignoring the uneasy feeling in my stomach. I just had to get out. I just had to keep moving. But when I hit the familiar stretch of highway, the one where I had picked her up before, my heart sank. The road, which should have been smooth and familiar, was now twisted. The asphalt was cracked and uneven, the signs leaning sideways as though they had been bent by some invisible force. The fog clung to the trees, twisting their shapes into something grotesque. The world outside the truck seemed like a nightmare come to life. I turned the corner, the one where I always saw her standing in the shadows. And there she was, her pale face glowed faintly in the darkness, her long white dress billowing in the breeze that was thick with fog. She didn't move when I drove past, just stood there still as stone, her eyes locked on mine. I slowed. I had no choice. I was being drawn toward her, like a moth to a flame, my mind screaming to keep going, to get out, but my body refused to obey. I pulled over again, my hands trembling on the wheel. The truck idled in the middle of the road, its engine humming in the thick fog. I glanced at the rearview mirror. She was still there, watching me. No, I thought. Not again. But it was too late. The door clicked open on its own, like something was guiding me. I turned to look at her, but she was already walking toward the truck, her eyes fixed on mine, her gaze intense, unwavering. "Get in," I said, my voice hoarse. She didn't speak. She never did. But this time I wasn't going to wait for her to climb into the passenger seat. I knew better than that. I had learned my lesson. I threw the truck into reverse and gunned the engine, speeding backward, trying to get away from her, trying to outrun whatever this was. But the fog thickened, the road twisted in ways I couldn't explain. I saw the same turn I had just passed moments ago, only now it seemed different. The signs had changed, the road stretching out in a way that felt like it was pulling me backward, dragging me deeper into the heart of this nightmare. I slammed my hands against the wheel, panic rising in my chest. "No!" I shouted, but the sound was swallowed by the thick fog that surrounded me. "I won't be one of you." But no matter how hard I tried, the road kept shifting, the path looping back, forcing me to follow the same trail over and over again. I looked to my side and she was there again, sitting next to me, her eyes blank, her face pale. "Not again," I whispered, my voice breaking. But she didn't answer, and I knew then. I was trapped. The fog was thick, suffocating. It pressed against the windows of the truck like it was alive, the mist swirling in hypnotic patterns that made it impossible to tell if I was moving forward or backward. The road, or whatever it had become, stretched, out in all directions, twisting, turning, looping around in ways that didn't make sense. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't think. All I could hear was the humming of the engine and the occasional whistling of the wind as it howled through the truck's vents. The clock on the dashboard blinked, 3:23 a.m. The numbers didn't change, like time itself had stopped, trapped in the same endless cycle. I tried to focus, to clear my mind, but it was like being stuck in a nightmare with no way out. Every time I looked at the rearview mirror, I saw her, the woman, the hitchhiker. She was always there, sitting silently in the passenger seat, her pale face staring blankly ahead. She didn't speak, she didn't even move. But I could feel her presence, cold and heavy, like a weight pressing down on me. I turned to her, my voice barely a whisper. "Why? Why do you keep coming back?" But she didn't answer. She never did. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, the sound of my anger breaking through the silence like a gunshot. I couldn't take it anymore. This couldn't be real. I had to be dreaming, or maybe I was losing my mind. I glanced out the window again, and my heart skipped a beat. The fog had parted just slightly, revealing a sign in the distance. It was one of those old highway signs, weathered by years of exposure. The text was faint, almost unreadable, but I could make out a few words. "End of the road." I froze. End of the road. I didn't remember seeing that sign before, and I had driven this stretch of highway countless times. I gritted my teeth and floored the accelerator. I had to get out of here. I had to break free. The truck roared to life, the engine growling in defiance of the mist that enveloped it. The sign was getting closer, but I didn't feel like I was approaching it. I felt like I was drifting toward it, like some invisible force was pulling me in. I could see it now. End of the road. The words were clearer, but they didn't make sense. Was it a warning? A place I wasn't supposed to be? But no matter how fast I drove, the sign didn't get any closer. It hung in the distance like a cruel joke, hanging just out of reach. And then, for a moment, everything went still. The truck's engine stopped humming. The fog receded, as though the mist itself was holding its breath. The air was thick with silence, and the world outside the truck seemed frozen in place. The sign was gone. The road was gone. I glanced to the side, and there she was again, the hitchhiker sitting silently in the passenger seat. But something had changed. Her face wasn't blank anymore. Her eyes were wide open, filled with an intensity I hadn't seen before. She was staring straight at me, her lips trembling like she was about to speak. "Please," she whispered, her voice fragile, barely audible above the hum of the truck. "Please don't leave." My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the words wouldn't come. My entire body was paralyzed, my mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts, none of them making sense. "Don't leave," I croaked, my voice cracking. "What do you mean? You're the one who—" But before I could finish, the truck lurched. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, the pavement buckling and twisting like it was alive. I looked out the window and saw the fog swirling in circles, the landscape warping in ways that defied logic. It was as if I were stuck in a vortex, caught in a place where time and space had no meaning. "Stop," the woman whispered, her voice trembling with something I couldn't quite place. "Stop trying to escape." I slammed my foot on the brake, but it didn't do anything. The truck kept moving, spinning in endless circles. My head spun with vertigo, and the reality around me seemed to distort, bending and warping like a dream that was slipping through my fingers. The woman's face was the only thing that remained constant. She was still there, her eyes locked on mine, her lips moving soundlessly as if trying to communicate something beyond words. The chill in the truck grew colder, and the fog outside thickened again, crawling over the windows like something that wanted to swallow me whole. Then suddenly, I remembered the waitress's words. "You'll always come back. Always." The town, the road, the hitchhiker. It was all part of some twisted, never-ending cycle. I was trapped. This wasn't just a nightmare. This was reality. And no matter how hard I tried to fight it, I would never escape. I slammed my hands against the wheel, my fingers numb from the cold. "No!" I shouted. "No, I refuse to be part of this. I won't let it happen." But the road was changing again. The signs were all wrong. The markings on the pavement twisted and contorted, turning into symbols I couldn't recognize. The truck's engine sputtered and stalled, but no matter how many times I tried to restart it, it refused to budge. And then, in the silence that followed, I heard something I hadn't expected. The softest, most eerie laugh. It came from the woman, but it wasn't hers. It was something darker, something that sent a chill crawling down my spine. The truck doors slammed shut, locking me in. I didn't even have time to react before the world outside the truck shifted again. The sign that had been so clear earlier, the one that read "End of the road," reappeared in the distance. But this time the words weren't the same. They were different. They read, "End of the driver." A cold wave of realization hit me like a tidal wave. It wasn't the road that was trapped. It was me. I was the one who had been pulled into this nightmare, a part of something that I would never understand. The ghostly hitchhiker, the endless loops, the fog, the warped road, it was all a part of me now. And no matter how far I drove, no matter how many times I tried to escape, I would always end up back here. I looked at the woman again, her face frozen in a sad, knowing expression. Her eyes, full of pity, never wavered. And then, for the first time, she spoke. "You can never leave," she said, her voice like the wind, cold and distant. "You're one of us now." Before I could respond, the fog thickened once again, swallowing the truck whole. The world outside faded into an impenetrable mist, and everything went silent. I was alone, and the road stretched on forever with no end in sight. I've been a truck driver for nearly 15 years now, and I've seen some strange stuff. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on that night. It was around 3 a.m., just another long haul on a stretch of interstate I knew like the back of my hand. But when I passed mile marker 348, I noticed something weird, something that didn't belong. You know how it is when you're driving on a lonely highway at night, the kind of loneliness that makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. The hum of the tires, the soft glow of the headlights illuminating the dark stretch of road ahead. You get used to it. But tonight the hum felt different, like the road was breathing, or maybe it was me who was tired. Either way, I was zoning out. Then, without warning, I saw it. A small sign just off the shoulder of the road. A sign I didn't recognize. It was an exit sign, bright green and simple. But what caught my eye wasn't the sign itself, it was the fact that I had never seen this exit listed on any map. The GPS didn't have it. The paper maps I keep on the dashboard didn't have it. It was like the exit had just appeared. I slowed down and leaned forward, squinting at the sign. It was for a town called Greywood, and the sign was clear. Exit, T2 Greywood, 5 miles. I'd been down this highway dozens of times and never seen that exit before. I checked the GPS again, no sign of it. Nothing. Just a blank screen where the road should have been. I thought about it for a second. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I had missed it in the past. I've certainly gotten used to the weird and unexplained. On the road, so why not? I figured I'd take the detour. I turned off the highway, the tires crunching as I hit the gravel road. The exit led into a small, narrow street, flanked by thick trees. There were no streetlights, just the dim glow from my headlights cutting through the dark. At first it seemed like any other small town, the kind of place you'd pass through on a road trip and forget about an hour later. The houses were old, some of them in disrepair, but they had that old-timey charm to them, like they were stuck in some forgotten era. There were a few old shops along the main road, their windows dark, but that was pretty normal for a place like this. But something felt off. Maybe it was the silence. Or maybe it was the way the town seemed too perfect. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something about Greywood that didn't sit right. I drove through the empty streets, passing the small post office, a diner that looked like it hadn't seen customers in decades, and a church with a steeple that seemed too high for such a small town. But then I noticed something else. The sun wasn't rising. Now I've been out on the road long enough to know that time doesn't always follow the clock, especially when you're out in the middle of nowhere. But it had been hours since I took that detour. I looked at the dashboard clock blinking in the dim light. 5:45 a.m. It was supposed to be morning by now, right? But there was no sign of dawn. The sky was still a pitch-black, heavy kind of dark. There were no stars either, just this eerie, oppressive blackness hanging over everything. I pulled into a gas station, or at least I thought it was a gas station. The pumps were old, rusted, and the building had a small sign above the door that read Greywood Fuel. The door creaked open as I stepped out of the truck. The air was thick and damp, the kind that clings to your skin, and the silence felt suffocating. I was the only one there. No cars, no people. Just the flickering neon light over the entrance. I figured I'd stretch my legs and grab a coffee, maybe talk to someone about this weird town. As I stepped inside, I immediately felt like I'd walked into another time. The place was dusty, the shelves full of old, expired goods, and there was a faint smell of mildew in the air. Behind the counter stood an older man, probably in his 70s, wearing a faded baseball cap and a plaid shirt. He didn't greet me at first, just stared at me with eyes that felt too intense. "Morning," I said, trying to break the silence. "You guys got any coffee?" He nodded slowly and pointed to the corner. "Coffee's over there. Take a seat if you want." I walked over to the coffee machine, but the air in the room felt thicker, heavier. I looked back at the man, but he was just staring at me, not in a friendly way, more like he was waiting for me to do something he didn't want me to do. I grabbed the coffee and sat at one of the tables by the window. The whole place felt frozen in time, like the world outside didn't matter, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong here. I spent a little while just sitting there, trying to make sense of what was happening. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that this was just another sleepy little town, and I was overthinking everything. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. After a while, I decided to take a walk and try to figure out what the hell was going on with the sun. I pushed open the door, and that heavy air hit me again. The town was still empty, no cars, no people. It was like I had stepped into some kind of forgotten ghost town, one that was never supposed to exist. I wandered through the streets, past the old run-down houses. Some of them looked lived in, but there were no signs of life, no movement. The windows were dark, and the silence pressed down on me like a weight. I stopped in front of the church and looked up at the steeple, which seemed too tall, too imposing. It felt like it was watching me. I could almost feel it, the eyes of this place trained on me. The sky above was still that impenetrable blackness. That's when I saw him, an old man sitting on a rocking chair on the porch of one of the houses. He was looking right at me, but not in a normal way. It was like he was waiting for me to do something. "Can I help you, son?" he called out, his voice slow and raspy. I walked over, deciding to ask him about the strange town. "Yeah, I'm just passing through. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. The sun's not rising and—" The old man didn't let me finish. "It doesn't rise here," he said, his eyes narrowing. "It never will again. That's the price we paid." "Price?" I asked, confused. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "The price for living in Greywood." I took a step back, unease crawling up my spine. "What do you mean?" The old man chuckled softly, rocking in his chair. "There are things in this town that shouldn't be. You'll see soon enough." And then he stopped. Silence fell over us, broken only by the creaking of his rocking chair. I turned to leave, but before I could take another step, I heard him whisper just loud enough for me to hear, "You should have kept driving, boy." I didn't want to believe the old man. Hell, I didn't even understand what he was talking about. The sun had to rise eventually, right? It was just some weird rural place. Maybe it was stuck in time, or maybe I'd hit some weird pocket of reality where things didn't work the way they should. But the more I looked around, the more I began to feel that prickling unease crawling up my spine. I shook my head and decided to keep moving. I turned away from the old man, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me, his eyes burning into my back. I needed to get back on the road. I'd figured out by now that there was something off about Greywood, but I wasn't the type to turn tail and run just yet. Maybe it was the trucker in me, always moving, always passing through strange places and brushing off the weirdness. But Greywood, there was something about it that gnawed at me, a gut instinct telling me that whatever was happening here wasn't something I could just shrug off. I made my way back to my truck, determined to put the whole town behind me. But when I reached the gas station, the door was locked. I had left the place wide open earlier, but now there was no sign of the old man. No one. Just the eerie silence. I stood there for a moment, hand on the door, my reflection staring back at me from the dusty glass. There was something different about it now, like the world outside had shifted. It didn't feel like the same place I had walked through earlier. I tried the door again, nothing. The lights flickered, and then, I swear, I heard something, a whisper from the other side of the glass. "Leave." The voice was faint, but clear. I jerked away from the door, my heart hammering. Who the hell was that? I looked around, no one, nothing, the town was empty. I'd had enough. I got back into the truck, cranked the engine, and turned the wheel. I wasn't sticking around to figure out what kind of messed-up town Greywood was, but as I drove back toward the highway, I saw something in the distance, a faint glimmer, like headlights. At first, I thought maybe I had missed the entrance and ended up on some other back road, but no, this was the way I had come. And there they were, 3 trucks just sitting at the edge of the highway, parked and facing my way. My hands gripped the wheel tight as I got closer. The trucks were all beat up, rusted, and old. The windows were cracked, and the headlights flickered like they were on the verge of going out. But what made my skin crawl wasn't the trucks themselves. It was the people standing beside them. Figures. Dark silhouettes just standing there, not moving, not talking, just watching. I slammed on the brakes. The trucks and the people weren't on the road. They were standing just beyond the edge of the exit, watching me as I approached. The moment I stopped, their eyes turned toward me. There were no words, only that chilling, empty stare. I didn't even think. I threw the truck in reverse and gunned it. I had no idea where I was going, but I wasn't staying there. I could feel their eyes on me, following me as I tore down the road. I don't know how long I had been driving. My mind was lost in a haze, the miles stretching endlessly before me. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, the trucks were still there, just far enough behind to feel safe, but close enough to never let me forget they were watching, waiting. I tried to convince myself it was all just a trick of my mind, that it was fatigue playing tricks on me, making everything seem more sinister than it was. But the longer I drove, the more my mind began to unravel. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't on the road anymore, that somehow the road had stopped moving forward. I looked at the clock on my dashboard, 6:02 a.m., but the sky outside was still pitch black, no sign of dawn, no sign of morning. Just a thick, oppressive dark that swallowed everything around me. A part of me thought, maybe the GPS is off, maybe there's something wrong with the system. But as I glanced at my phone, no bars, no signal. The little icon on the corner of the screen blinked, just no service. I pressed harder on the gas, hoping that I'd see some sign of life, that I'd see another car or some lights in the distance, anything to break this suffocating isolation. Then I saw it. A glimmer of light, like headlights flashing in the distance. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't alone, I wasn't crazy. Something or someone was out there, and maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this nightmare. I pushed the accelerator harder, the truck lurching forward, the sound of the engine roaring louder, louder as the headlights grew nearer. But the more I drove, the stranger it felt. The lights were too bright, too close, yet too far away. They flickered in and out like a broken lamp, and the road, God, the road was beginning to twist and turn in impossible ways. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel. Come on, where the hell is it? The lights ahead flickered once again and then disappeared. My stomach dropped as I slammed on the brakes. I felt like I was stuck in a dream, unable to wake up, unable to move forward, like the road had closed in on itself. The ground under my tires had changed. The road was different. My mind screamed that I was on some kind of loop, trapped. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I knew I had to turn around, but my hands felt like lead as I gripped the steering wheel. I spun the truck around, heading back the way I came, hoping I could find a way out of this trap. But as I looked ahead, my eyes widened with horror. There, at the end of the road, was the same exit sign again. That damn sign. It was like I hadn't gone anywhere at all. I stopped the truck. The engine idled. My breath caught in my throat. Could hear the soft hum of the tires, but it felt like the world had gone silent. It was as though time itself was holding its breath. I rolled down my window and leaned my head out. The air was thick, and the silence was unbearable. There were no crickets chirping, no wind rustling through the trees, just an unnatural, suffocating stillness. And then I saw them. The figures from before, the trucks, the men. They were standing. In the distance, closer now, on the side of the road, their bodies barely visible in the fog. The figures were still, unnaturally still, like statues carved from shadow. The headlights of the trucks flickered and dimmed behind them, casting long shadows across the road. My heart pounded in my chest. I had to go. I had to leave. But no matter how hard I pressed the gas pedal, my truck refused to move forward. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then died. I slammed my hands on the wheel, panicking. The figures were closer now, too close. I could feel their gaze on me. One of them stepped forward. It was the old man from the rocking chair. His face was gaunt and pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. There was no warmth in them, just a cold, empty void. "Didn't I warn you, boy?" he said, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "This place, it doesn't let you leave." The blood in my veins turned cold. "What do you mean?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. He smiled, and it was a terrible, unsettling grin. "Greywood doesn't let anyone go. Not unless you're already part of it." I stared at him in confusion, my body frozen, unable to look away. And then I realized I wasn't in control anymore. I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe it was when I blinked or when I looked away from the old man's eyes, but something shifted. I blinked again, and the world around me had changed. My truck was gone. The highway had vanished. Greywood was no longer just a place on the map. It was now the only place, and I had become a part of it. There was no escape, no turning back. The road, the trucks, the eerie night, they were my new reality now. The old man was still standing there, his face twisted in a kind of grim satisfaction. I didn't know how much time had passed since I arrived, or if time even mattered here. But it was clear. Greywood had claimed me, and there was no leaving. The trees that had once lined the road were now towering, casting shadows that felt too heavy, too dark. The houses along the street were closer, their windows black and staring, like eyes watching me, waiting for me to understand. I stumbled out of my truck, my legs weak, my body shaking. The air felt wrong, thick, like it was made of something other than oxygen. The ground beneath my feet wasn't dirt. It felt soft, spongy, like I was walking on something that wasn't real. I didn't know how long I had been walking through the foggy streets of Greywood. I couldn't even remember where I had been. I was lost in it now. Every corner I turned, every street I crossed, the town seemed to stretch endlessly. It was like I was walking in a circle, but the more I tried to escape, the further I felt from the truth. And then I saw them, the other people, the ones from the trucks. They were everywhere now, walking through the streets, their faces hollow, their eyes empty. I saw the woman with the long black hair, the one who had been standing by the truck earlier, her mouth slightly open, as though whispering something I couldn't hear, and the man with the wide, unblinking eyes, standing at the corner of the street. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were part of Greywood now, and they weren't going anywhere. I stopped walking, my legs trembling beneath me. I was surrounded, the people, the figures, and the town itself. It was all becoming too much to bear, and then I heard it again. The voice, low, soft, faint. "You'll stay with us, Cal." It was calling me, pulling me deeper into the heart of Greywood. I knew now what the old man had meant when he said, "The town doesn't let anyone go." It didn't just claim your body, it claimed your soul. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But the ground wouldn't let me move. My body was frozen, and I could feel the cold of Greywood sinking into my bones, taking hold of me. The fog thickened around me, and I felt a pull in my chest. The cold wrapped around my heart, and I could feel my breath slow, my vision blur. Greywood had taken me, and I was never going to leave.